Hello, and welcome to the forecast for 2022. I'm Marga, and this is an astrological forecast for agents of evolution. Everybody out there willing and able to stay on your evolutionary edge in service of our collective evolution. 2022 is a year that will call you forward into becoming the agent of evolution that you uniquely are capable of being. I'm calling 2022 the year of sourcing light from within. 2022 is going to be a year where we're going to be called to understand our own truth from within, rather than listening to all of the opinions from the world outside. Really understanding what are our values, what are the things that we know about how we want to live, and how do we align ourselves to those values and those principles and live from those places. I've been a counseling astrologer for over 20 years. And when I began doing these reports, I think it started out as a newsletter many, many years ago. The purpose for it from my end was really to give you a sense of the astrological weather coming up, not as a prediction, not as a way of knowing exactly what will happen, because astrological prediction really isn't capable of that degree of factual accuracy. It is, however, capable of a certain kind of navigational guidance that helps us in our own evolution, in our own spiritual evolution, to understand how to move, understand what is being asked of us, understand the growth ahead. So that's really why I do this. So as you listen to this 2022 report, keep that in mind, that this is something that is intended to help you navigate your own evolution through the year. I will speak about some of the things that I see coming up possibly for the United States, for instance. This is a field called mundane astrology, or astrology that is about making predictions that are on the level of the world, or the or countries, or cultures. So I will do some of that, but it is all for the purpose of helping us each align with our own evolutionary path. During 2022, we're going to see a juxtaposition of the very, very bright and light sides of life with the very dark sides of life. And this might be really bewildering for many of us. It might kind of throw us. If you're finding yourself thrown or out of sorts, you're not alone. Trust me on this, that we are all, to some degree, feeling a little bewildered by the times we live in. And it is an evolutionary opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity when so much change is happening, to really strengthen the muscles of our own awareness. For everyone who's on my email list, I'm going to be sending you a 2022 transit guide. If you're not already on my email list, you can sign up for the email list. I'll put a link below this YouTube video, and you can always go to my homepage on my website, and right there on the homepage is a sign up. The transit guide will take you through the 12 months of the year and just give you the important astrological weather. Some of these terms you may be familiar with, like Mercury retrograde. There are 4 of them this year. The very last one is starting at the very end of December. Usually we only have 3 in a year, but this year we have a 4th one that starts right at the end of the year. And the eclipses, solar eclipse, lunar eclipse. As you all know, if you've been listening to me for a while, we have 2 pairs of eclipses every year. A solar and a lunar pair happens 6 months apart. So some of these terms you'll be familiar with, and some of them won't be very familiar, but if you tune into these monthly video forecasts, I'll explain a little bit more when we come to that month what that transit is about. But that PDF will give you a head start. You can sort of do some planning and scheduling, maybe transfer some of those dates, like the Mercury retrogrades. You can transfer some of those dates to your own calendar and plan and schedule in accordance with those astrological weather events, so that you're in alignment with the natural cycles and the natural energetic landscape rather than being at odds with it. I don't know if you can hear them, but the birds outside are having a little convention. And I think it's just so appropriate to how we as a culture are, we as a global family, a global human family, are finding our way through these times. Uh, who knows what they're talking to each other about? But we are all talking with each other about the things that are happening among us, and having our disagreements and our divisions. And 2022 continues in that vein quite a bit. There are some hotspots during the year, and I'd like to go over some of these hotspots with you as we bring in this idea of sourcing light from within. And even before we do that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what's going on for the United States astrologically. Please bear with me, those of you who are watching from other countries. I know it's awfully US centric of me to take so much time in this forecast to talk about the United States. And I'm really sorry, but it is a big year for the United States, and I think it will have some global effects. So bear with me on this one. The first thing to understand about the United States is that we're going through what's known as a Pluto return, which happens every 250 years. So this Pluto return is a time when we are being faced with the original shadow that was part of the creation of this country. Have we learned anything in 250 years? Or will we repeat some of the shadow lessons or shadow material that we've been dealing with for since the country's inception? I don't think there's any coincidence, for instance, that Black Lives Matter is such a big movement right now, or that there is such awareness at this point of the genocide of Native Americans and how that helped shape this country. So that's kind of one element of the United States shadow. We could also talk about things like class mobility, the ability or the idea that anybody can be anything in this country, and the access to resources in order to do that. There are many aspects of the United States shadow, and as we come to our Pluto return this year, we're going to be addressing some of those things and possibly repeating some of those things into this next cycle, or really having completed, the opportunity to complete some things. We're also going through our Sade Sati. So those of you who've been in individual session with me, you might have heard me talk about this. Sade Sati is a name that Vedic astrologers give to a transit of Saturn to the natal moon of a chart. So what a transit is when a planet in the sky makes a kind of geometric aspect to another planet. And so in this case, this is transiting, in other words, where Saturn is in the sky now is coming to the place where the United States' moon was at the time of its birth. So this Sati is a very eventful time. It usually brings us to a certain kind of emotional self-reliance where we are faced with doing without some of the supports that we've standardly had and needing to find the resourcefulness from within ourselves. So this again is a certain kind of calling to source light from within. So where we may have had, let's say, the great benefit of luminaries, people, leaders, and writers, and artists, and thinkers, and scientists, and statesmen and women who have been able to give us courage and give us the sense of, okay, this is what we're shooting for. I know in my own life, there have been many teachers who have passed away in these last 2 months. And, I grieve their loss. And that's a kind of Saturn conjunct moon sort of thing. And since the United States is going through Saturn conjoining its moon, as a country, we're feeling the loss of some of these sources of support, which requires us to go deeper within to find that kind of self-reliance on our own capacity to feel connection and goodness and light. Also, for the United States, we're going to be experiencing a Mars return this year as well. Mars features pretty heavily into 2022, so I'll talk about that when we go through some of the hotspots in the year. The midterm elections for the United States on November 8th are a big hotspot. It's a pretty major moment for the United States, and so this set of astrological weather points to a real examination of what the leadership in this country ought to be doing, what it ought not to be doing. It's also a pretty volatile kind of set of transits, which tells us that whatever's happening at that election will likely go through what the last election went through, which is a lot of controversy and backlash, and actually seeing things in a different light. I think many of us will be forced to look at the branches of government and how we want them to operate, what we consider to be lawful and fair. I will say that it really does seem like voting rights comes into play pretty majorly in during this year and at midterm elections. So because the United States is going through such a transformative time, each of us in our own lives, especially those of us who live in the United States, are having to really decide for ourselves what we value and needing to rise to that occasion. There may be moments during the year where it feels really dark. And so a really important thing is to know how to brighten your own light. How do you do that? How do you source light from within? What are your ways of brightening your light? It's a really important contemplation for this year and for the next few years. As we go through this transition in the world, each of us being able to stick with our own values and brighten our own light is creating what's possible for this world. So never underestimate your own ability to affect the overall outcome for all of us. Okay, the first hotspot is March 2nd. Venus is going through a very interesting time during the month of March. She is what we call hemmed in between two kind of bad boy planets. While she transits between Mars and Saturn, she, it's sort of like she gets a little bit like, oh my gosh, where are all my peeps? Mars and Saturn are a little bit just stylistically different than Venus, so her light dims a little. But on the other hand, it's a very productive month because Venus and Mars are traveling together and they are kind of having to work together, which, as we know, makes the world go round when Venus and Mars are kind of doing their dance together. Venus and Mars are conjunct Pluto on March 2nd, and Mercury is conjunct Saturn. So right around that very beginning of March, there's a moment of truth and productivity. It's like we're seeing our true way forward and putting our energy in that direction. And it could be kind of an intense time, a demanding time. And the advice I would give for that moment in time is about telling the truth, telling yourself the truth, and putting all your energy in the direction of your truth. We'll get into that more just before, in the March forecast. Okay, the next hotspot is in April. From about April 8th through 12th is when the transit of Jupiter conjunct Neptune is exact. And so we'll be feeling it for the month of April, to be sure. Possibly you could say the year of 2022. This is kind of an energetic hue or flavor that we'll be feeling. Jupiter and Neptune can be really fun, depending on your relationship to it. But it can also be a little deceptively fun. So, many astrologers are talking about this conjunction of Jupiter and Neptune and talking about kind of the fun sides and some of the, like a hangover is coming because there's intoxication there kind of feelings. So Jupiter conjunct Neptune could lead to things like some movie or book or story or maybe even celebrity kind of a story that really captures our attention and kind of takes our minds away from our humdrum everyday existence. That's kind of a typical Jupiter Neptune thing, but this can also be this could relate to flooding. It's Jupiter is about an abundance of, or the growth of the growth of something, whatever it's touching. Neptune is about glamour and illusion, but it is also about the sea, the ocean. It's also about our spiritual nature, our sense of at one-ment with each other. So this is why with astrological prediction, it's not, it can manifest in many different ways. So the better thing often is to just understand the energy of the transit and work with that. So the energy of Jupiter conjunct Neptune is about something that makes us feel intoxicated or elevated or inspired, or we get to escape from the humdrum. So all of these things are true. But Neptune also carries a bit of deception with it. There's not always things aren't always as they seem with Neptune. So there can be a bit of like an overblown sort of quality to whatever is happening in April. One kind of easy prediction is that, wouldn't it make sense if Metaverse came up with, a virtual reality aspect of that platform's offerings. And virtual reality itself really seems to play a big role in 2022. And the introduction of certain technologies and toys and even possibly games or movies or characters or stories that capture our attention enough to want to give virtual reality a try. As a human being, I'm learning just like you are. We're all learning in this together. Uh, Virtual reality is something we really want to look at carefully. Uh, I was having a conversation the other day with someone, and we were talking about the idea of enlightenment, the promise of some of the Eastern religions that enlightenment requires a physical body, not a virtual body, a physical body. I'm predisposed, as you can hear in my tone, to mistrusting virtual reality, not for what it might be able to do for us, but in how far it might go, what it might do to limit the human being's experience of the self, of awareness, of the truth of our being. So it is possible that virtual reality could also help that in certain ways. So these are some of the things that I think in April we'll really start to see being discussed and being experimented with, and maybe even the public getting very kind of excited about. Jupiter conjunct Neptune can also be the presence of a teacher or a figure, a leader of some kind who brings hope back to their people. So those figures could really rise in April and bring some kind of message that carries hope. Okay, the next hot spot is at the end of July. We've got a transit of Mars conjoining Uranus, conjoining Rahu, or the North Node. This is a kind of powder keg kind of transit. It is definitely something that will change the course of where we're heading. It's likely to bring about some sudden events that maybe involve technology, might involve the internet. It's a kind of accident-prone set of transits, and it could bring about things we don't want, but it could also bring about breakthroughs in certain areas that are really useful. Early August, we are then going through Mars square Saturn right around August 7th and 8th. And so here we can expect some of that new direction to be checked, that there's like some authority is coming in and saying, no, we're not doing that. Or something from the physical world is putting up a limitation to the forward motion of this of the progress of whatever that transit was at the end of July. All of that is to say that end of July, beginning of August time is a time when it really looks like there will be some new events, new movements, and especially here in the United States, it seems like that's a moment for some possible eruptions. What I would recommend, if this is your if this is your inclination to use these transits as a way of working with your own evolution, is to really do work on anger before we get to that transit. Look at the things that you are, frustrated about, rageful about in terms of what's going on in the United States, and work with it. Meaning, doesn't mean go out there and spew anger. It means work with your anger. It means, first of all, admit it. Do something to kind of get clear about it. Work with the content a little bit. Maybe you can do some of that in journaling. And then releasing some of that, not at others, obviously, but in some productive way, whether it's really heavy exercise or smashing plates or whatever it is that you do, that just working with anger is going to be a good thing. Okay, so that final hotspot in the year is that November 8th time period, which is the midterm elections for the United States. We've got a lunar eclipse happening. We also have retrograde Mars conjunct Uranus on that day. And so that time period is also somewhat chaotic and may kind of harken back to whatever happens on July 31st and right in that the first week of August time period. So we're going to be looking probably at issues of integrity and fairness. All sides are going to be having their beefs that are being aired, and it's a kind of dramatically angry time. So again, working with anger this year is a good idea. The lunar eclipse on November 8th is in the lunar sign of Bharani, which is about whistleblowers and fairness and exposing people, exposing information that can change people's minds. It's going to be, I'm going to say, a confusing time for many. And so this is why it's important to source light from within. It's going to be important this year to connect with those timeless truths that go beyond political parties, that go beyond ways of dealing with a global pandemic, that go beyond opinions about how money should be handled or managed. What are the timeless truths that you know? And not from your mind, but really from when you're connected deep within yourself, when you're in a state of meditation. What are the things that arise that you know to be unassailably true? And as we each do that, we are contributing to this collective evolution that is taking place. Remember that the good guys don't always win, or your good guy may not always win. My good guy may not always win. We don't always get our way in the world. That's part of the game of being alive in a human suit. But what we can do is always kind of keep our eye on the prize, keep our eye on what it is that we do value, what it is that we do want to see more of, and how we want to live. What is our own standard for integrity? I definitely want to leave you with this one thought, which is to try through the year of 2022 to not take things personally. Try to not take personally what other people do or say or don't do or don't say. Each of us is going through so much right now. And many of us have sort of grown to rely on other people or certain sources of light and truth and support and the feeling of goodness and the feeling of connection. Those sources may not be available to you at certain times, and it's not personal. It is part of the design of how things are going, astrologically. We are being in some ways split apart, and there is a purposefulness to that. There is a kind of evolutionary direction that is taking us a little bit more in the direction of spirit, being able to connect on the level of spirit. And in our physical world, it might be that certain technologies allow us to connect, like I'm connecting with you right now on over the internet, or that maybe virtual reality starts to become a major player. But ultimately, it's on the level of spirit that we actually connect. Uh, and whether we physically can connect or not. So I'd encourage everyone to give everyone a lot of slack in the year 2022, because we're all going through so much change right now. We're being asked to really source some of our strength and courage and goodness from within, and not be so reliant on others outside ourselves or the world or our government or anything to provide that for us. Okay, so for sourcing light from within, we're going to start right where we are. We're not going to pretend we're somewhere else. We're going to be right where we are. And we're going to brighten our light by doing the practices that we know bring us back to ourselves, that bring us more light. And make sure you know what your go-to activities are that can bring you back to um, brightening your own light. All right, so enjoy your January, and I will see you again in just before February, hopefully. Sorry that this one was so late. It's been quite a few weeks for me, but hopefully the February report will come out before February. And yeah, take care of yourself, and good luck with sourcing your own light from within.